Hello and welcome to this Register webinar. Now, if you thought that Trump versus Clinton was the biggest debate of the week, you're going to be sincerely surprised by what we come up with when we talk about the feasibility of continuous security. And what we're talking about here is the security of applications in the continuous development world. I've got with us Jon Smith of Veracode, who just happens to be a purveyor of security products for developers, which is very handy given that's what we're talking about. And Dale Vile of Freeform Dynamics, as you know, does an awful lot of research with you guys at the Register, and is also an ex-developer himself. So hopefully we'll have a very active and thorough debate over the next hour. We're going to be covering how security is changing over the past 10 years and how that's really reflecting the way that development has moved on, and looking into the state of application security today. And yep, there's things going wrong, and the question I have, and I'm going to be putting to our panelists, is not how can automation help, but can automation help given the kinds of chaos that we're going to be seeing. Jon, if I hand over to you, you've been working in this area for a little while now, so maybe if you could say what you're hoping to bring to the party with your background.
So, I've been working in application security since 2004, so as you say, a reasonable time. And there's definitely been changes happening over that period. When we started out, it was very much a security-led thing. We'd look at maybe audits taking place. We are seeing more of a move into this being part of software development, part of the life cycle of the applications. I don't think it's happening fast enough. So if I can get one thing out of this session, it would be that perhaps the people that are watching it will gain a greater sense of urgency around dealing with the problem of application security.
Crack on.
Yeah, get on. Get on.
Okay. So without spoiling the punchline, Dale, what's your view on how the world's changing?
It's interesting because security always in all of our surveys comes out very high on the list, if not top of the list, in a generic sense. But then when you look at a lot of what people are spending money on in the security space, there's a load being spent on network security at the moment. Perimeter security, as you were saying earlier on. Mobile security is a pretty big thing, and you can run through sort of various aspects of security, access management, and so on. But actually, you very rarely see a budget line labelled application security, and I think that's pretty much. I mean, if we've got a mission today, it's to try and sort of create that budget line, if you like, get that imperative there on the table.
Yeah.
I think we were going to start with a picture, so let's go straight to that. Which firefighting is a familiar scenario in many organisations, Jon.
I think it is. I think I was speaking earlier about that transition from security, thinking about application security, to development, thinking about application security. The further transition that we're starting to see now is because application security necessarily follows application development. The trends in application development are affecting the trend in application security. And I know it can be a slightly contentious term, the DevOps label of things, but this notion that software gets developed and then gets thrown over the wall, worked fine in our test environment, it's now operations problem. I think it's starting to change. I don't think it's changing fast enough, but that's really one of the things we're starting to see happening.
So DevOps is a thing, not just for DevOps people. So, as in, there's a lot of evangelism around. Everyone should be doing it in that way, but it's.
Yeah.
What's your view as an observer onto the DevOps world?
Yeah, so like I say, the actual label DevOps is not always a popular one, but certainly the notion that software development has grown up quite a bit. It's moved on quite a bit from the sort of monolithic old waterfall models of development. We've moved through the kind of world of agile software development and starting to see changes in the way that development is working. And of course, while all that's been happening, I think it's fair to say that operations have been developing in much the same way. They've been doing things more efficiently, doing things faster. And as we see changes in Well, as we've got on this slide here, things like the move to cloud, where infrastructure starts to become something that's scriptable, something that's actually code in and of itself. Mobile computing, you mentioned earlier, the vast trend towards that. We've got iPad on the table here and another one tucked away down here. We've all got our smartphones. More and more work, more and more activity being done there. It's a rapidly changing environment as well. Lots more things happening and things happening faster. And all of this is kind of pulling together to create this need for a more dynamic, faster way of developing and deploying software. And that's leading to some kind of trends in the sort of technologies that are in use there, I think.
I don't know, Dale, if, again, with your background as a developer, but weren't we talking about this stuff like when we were kids? The DevOpsy stuff, or is this really a major transition? And particularly in terms of the survey work that you're doing, are we actually seeing organisations all running towards a world in which DevOps integrates?
The way I look at it is it's about breaking down barriers and integrating things and removing handoffs, because when you look, I'm old enough to know when people started to put rigid demarcation in place between operations and dev on some of the early mini computers, and that was a bit of a stretch for us, because before that we used to do everything end to end. So arguably we're sort of coming around full circle.
So you were there when the slash arrived between dev and ops.
Exactly, yeah. But for me, we've done a load of research around DevOps, and if you talk to what I would affectionately call DevOps purists, they would say unless you're doing this, and this, then it's not really DevOps. I think that kind of misses the point, because what we see a lot of organisations doing in response to the fact that everything needs to be delivered much more quickly for one, but also iterated much more quickly for two, because there are a lot of application areas nowadays where even if you were to spend the time putting together really hard spec, based on lots of user research and focus groups and whatever else you do to define requirements, as soon as that thing gets out in the wild, it doesn't behave as you thought it would, for whatever reason, and that applies to so many more applications now. So development is becoming a lot more iterative, or let's say application delivery is becoming a lot more iterative. So when people say DevOps, I don't think we should get hung up about specifics of methodologies. It's really just trying to smooth that transition of code from one end of the life cycle out into operations, but also on the understanding that you're going to continue to be going backwards and forwards, iterating. So that's naturally bringing Dev and Ops people together, regardless of what you call it. That actually, that diagram there pretty much says
so
it.
That's the text may be a little small there. If it is, then we've got mature at the top, and evolving, basic, not evolving, and nah.
Yeah, exactly.
What do we mean by evolving then?
Well, these are people, largely speaking, who are just trying to pull the threads together, break down the barriers, get a little bit more integration. There is a hard edge to that, which we'll come on to in a minute, around automation, which I think is a pretty key enabler. And I think sometimes people get a little bit too hung up on the cultural side and the organisational side, whereas actually you can achieve a lot just by putting the right level of
That's possibly people that get hung up on the cultural side of things are getting hung up on the cultural side.
Yeah, it's not. I don't want to, diss that, but it is important. But actually, it's important to put some tangible bits in as well to actually support the coming together of groups. And
are there more verticals that are where I'm trying to get to? So my hidden agenda for the question is because we see a lot about the kind of new breed of companies that are building everything on top of Amazon, and they're saying DevOps, DevOps, DevOps. But how does that apply to, I don't know, Credit Suisse or a Honda factory or whatever? So when I say where are the verticals, how do these things, how are they applying back to traditional organisations?
Well, there's two trends really. I mean, one trend is anyone who's got a B2C element to their business. If you think of any of the big brands that we sort of interact with on a daily basis. I mean, they're building. They've had websites for years. They've become more and more interactive. How did it become more and more interactive? Well, through web applications. So anyone who's got a very fast-moving consumer-facing focus, so that cuts across all the industries that you can imagine there: automotive, retail, and it's pretty obvious, banking. So it tends to be where a lot of this very fast-moving iterative stuff starts. But actually, as the workforce has got more tooled up, let's say, and better connected, a lot of those same principles now have bled across into sort of internally facing applications. So it might have started with externally facing, but it's equally as important now for internally facing stuff. So it's just a trend that's unfolding, and it moves a little bit quicker depending on the vertical, but there isn't a vertical that it doesn't apply to. That's probably the best way of answering that question.
Yeah, I think that the fact that pretty much every business today runs on software. There's very few businesses that aren't dependent in one way or another on software, and whether that's externally facing to the consumer or whether it's about the systems internally that allow you to work with your supply chain and deliver a product of some kind. All of this can produce a competitive advantage, or it can produce a disadvantage to you when it's not working properly. I'm sure we've all worked in companies or in organisations where there was that system that you had to deal with. Expenses is often a good example of this, where the expenses system is so god awful that it takes you half a day to submit your expense claim. These kind of things slow the business down. Now, if you can deliver better software more quickly, and I have to say, when it comes to expenses, I've still seen little efforts.
Oh yeah, I was going to say that's a meeting room scheduling.
If you can do this stuff better, more quickly, more efficiently, and with less internal friction, then that makes you a more efficient business. It makes you more successful.
I'm fascinated by this idea that it kind of starts from the customer and is kind of moving into the organisation, and so there's a lot of organisation that isn't actually about the customer at all, but then you've got the employee aspect as well. So it starts with the people, and it's kind of gradually.
Yeah, and the interesting thing about that chart, for instance, is with surveys, you might go and interview someone in one of the big banks or a big retailer or whatever, but they aren't necessarily representative of that whole organisation. If you talk to someone in the digital business group, you'll get one view, and they might say they're at the top of there with mature DevOps. You go into some of the core application groups, and they'll say, we're pretty basic. We're doing some basic stuff to try and streamline DevOps, but I think we've done enough for now. We're good enough. And a lot of people will be at various stages. So it's not a binary thing. And I actually think evolving is probably the most mature response, funny enough, because I don't think we're ever going to get to a steady state where the way we do it is the way we'll always do it.
Life's a journey and all that.
Yeah.
So we were going to put this up and talk about automation a little bit, just from the point, this is what it should look like, right? And this is our, if you like, our penultimate preamble slide in terms of what DevOps is all about. Am I right?
Yeah, kind of. So people talk about DevOps. I mean, I prefer most of the time to talk about continuous delivery, which is basically the tooling side. That's an easy way to think about it. No, look, I think the thing is, within development teams, there's been a lot of automation going on. Continuous integration, automated testing. There's all kinds of automation that's been going on the left-hand side of that chart. In ops teams, Puppet, Chef, VMware tools, Microsoft tools, there's been a load of automation going on there. So pretty much across the IT department, we've seen these bits of automation just growing up quite naturally, mostly bottom up as opposed to driven top down. And I think a lot of what we talk about with continuous delivery in DevOps is almost kind of joining some of these islands of automation together. And I have to say, it annoys me a little bit when I talk to people who've grown up, they're really developer centric, and they talk as if the ops guys are Neanderthals and have never actually sort of automated anything at all. And the dev guys, the ops guys, sometimes you talk to them and they think developers are just a bunch of ill-disciplined, just a liability. Yeah. And I think a lot of it is about getting these things working together. But tooling to try and bridge the gap is pretty important. What's missing from that, though? That's the interesting question.
Well, actually, before that, I was going to say, and I do like the fact that you refer to it as continuous delivery rather than continuous deployment.
Yeah.
Because I think very, very few organisations are anywhere near doing continuous deployment, or even necessarily have much of an appetite for it. It's that sort of to use a phrase that's going to segue nicely into the next slide, I think, it's the unicorns, isn't it, that are doing this notion of continuous deployment.
We got unicorns.
We got unicorns.
Have we got unicorns?
So the real world is much more about continuously delivering. When you choose to deploy is another question, but it's that continuous delivery that's the piece. And as you say, the thing that at this stage is missing from this picture is security.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, absolutely. And interestingly, we did go back in our histories of Agile and DSTM and all kinds of methods in the past. And if you scroll back and do a bit of a Google search on the archives, you'll find it was always missing. I think it's,
yes, this is not new.
So a couple of screenshots of some stuff that you wanted to talk around, John, there.
Yeah, well, I guess the first one is it's that message of, if we're doing continuous deployment, well, it's potentially just a way of getting insecure software deployed more quickly, deploying known vulnerabilities, so particularly around where you're making use of known vulnerable components. And then this sort of unicorn world of DevOps that's continuously deploying, well, the poor guys in security are continuously trying to deal with
what I'm getting out of this is that the world of development, the world of operations, they're both continuing to move on, and security is always the kind of poor cousin. It's the we'll get round to that. I think you said that earlier. It's the get round to it.
The afterthought. Yeah. And we were talking earlier about the world of Agile, and I was referencing my Scrum Master training that I went on, and that when we talked there about having these multidisciplinary teams, none of those disciplines that were being mentioned were security, and that's where a shift still needs to take place. We do see it in some customers. Some organisations are actively embedding security into the development process. But it's a rarer thing than it should be, without doubt.
Yeah, and I think if you look at DevOps in a slightly different way, it's not about Dev and Ops. It is about getting the people who are involved in the whole delivery cycle working together. And there's a cultural dimension to that, obviously, but I think there is very, very much a sort of practical dimension to that, whether it be processes that sort of hop over boundaries to avoid handoffs, or tools that just pass a job or a task through seamlessly without anyone having to do much other than maybe a confirm or whatever, and just deal with exceptions. These are the kind of things that we need to do. The one thing as part of that, which is quite interesting, that reinforces the fact it's not just about dev guys and ops guys, is a lot of people I talk to about DevOps now, they're starting to talk about the importance of having architects in the mix. And an architect is arguably not a dev, not an ops, but they're pretty fundamental if you're building a new application that your business is going to be relying on. You've got to put it on the right stack. You've got to have the right kind of communication model. You've got to have, and it's not long before you get to and don't you need the right security model, and don't you need the right security processes in place? So what I'm wondering is, now DevOps guys are very comfortable with the idea of let's invite the architects in the mix. It doesn't have to all be just sort of made up as we go along. That you do need to build on a solid foundation, and if security is the next step, it's part of that. I don't know if you've come across that.
Well, it absolutely should be.
Should be.
It absolutely should be.
Is anyone doing it though?
So yeah, some organisations are. We see some quite interesting things happening with some customers where they put in place something like a security champions programme. Okay. And I've heard this talked about at various conferences and things. The idea of really expanding that base of the multidisciplinary team, such that there are either, well, in a perfect world you might have a security specialist embedded in the team, but security specialists are actually reasonably few and far between. So a more common model is to try and find the people in the development organisation or the ops organisation or wherever it might be that have an interest and an appetite to know more about doing things securely, about making things better, and then start to put in place training, incentives. Capture the flag seems to be quite a good common, do a lunch and learn type of approach of doing capture the flag sessions. They're kind of fun. They're a bit more interesting than a stale kind of presentation format, and they kind of get people interested and thinking in the right ways. And when you start to see that having an effect on an organisation, you do see that the sort of first time test of an application, the bar is no longer here, it's moved up to here. We're starting with more secure software from the word go. But it's not just about doing it once. You've got to be doing this continuously.
By some remarkable coincidence, we just had a question in on that exact topic. So James Turvey just asked, are you actually seeing security being built into the DevOps process anywhere, and if so, how? Which kind of... So,
yes. In fact, I think that might be touched on in one of our slides to come. That so this is a moment of shameless plug for Veracode here, is that we are a software as a service application security testing vendor, and that model of being software as a service means that all of our customers are testing through our central service, so we get to see a bit more about what's going on with organisations and what they're doing. We are seeing some applications that are being tested hundreds of times over the course of the year, pretty much daily, in some cases more than once a day. So I think the peak I've seen is somewhere around about 900 scans of an individual application over the course of the year. Now, assuming that they don't work 7-day weeks, then you're getting into around about three tests being done every day, and that's only possible when you integrate into the automated tooling that exists in typically this.
Do you think someone's being performance measured there?
Well, I'd like to think that perhaps,
with a good result.
Yeah, I mean, perhaps performance measurement is something that's important here. We see measures being put in place around most things in businesses. Well, perhaps we do need a few more measures around application security.
There is another way of looking at it, though. I mean, when you look at it, and it's interesting that you use the word testing in a security context, but actually, developers are very comfortable with the idea of incorporating testing into their automated build process. So actually, they kick off a build, and magically, it gets functionally tested, whether it's at unit level or integration level later on that pipeline. Yeah. So I would imagine that when you're seeing that kind of rapid
that's absolutely the way,
repeatability, it's just people automating it, and I think that's where we need to get to with this stuff. If we think of it as an aspect of testing, really, why don't we automate it in the same way as we do every other aspect of testing? It's what people are trying to do, have been for quite a while. So.
Yeah, for sure.
There's another question that's just come up, by the way, which I think should be a theme that runs through the second half of the webinar. So I'll ask it now, but I'm not necessarily thinking we'll get a straight answer straight away, which is, are you able to explain, this from Marcus, by the way, thank you Marcus, so are you able to explain how continuous delivery modus operandi would work with the world of IoT, which of course is the next big thing, or one of the next big things, and where security fits into that. And Marcus says, personally, I find that terrifying. So...
well, I think Marcus might... I don't know what Marcus is in Marcus's mind, but I think it's important, picking up on what Jon was saying earlier on, to distinguish between continuous deployment and continuous delivery. Continuous deployment basically says I'm checking everything as I go. So when I get to a point where I'm ready to deliver something, I don't necessarily deliver it, but I know that thing is as robust as it could be. And by, a lot of people talk about left shifting. You shift as much testing and validation, call it upstream, as if you like, in that direction as possible. And it's the old stitch in time saves 9. Catch something early, whether it's a vulnerability or a bug. It's a lot cheaper to fix it than leaving it to the end. So there's in the context of IoT, there's really no difference. I mean, it's software development. You need a lot more control at the end of that, which is how does it get from a stable build out into the live environment. But that's not really a DevOps question, that's a deployment question.
Yeah, and I was going to say there's been an interesting example of that in the last few weeks with Tesla, and a security researcher identified a vulnerability in the Tesla car, which I think we can treat as a thing. It's quite a big thing, but it's a thing nonetheless. One of the things that I really liked about that story was the fact that, well, first of all, there was good collaboration between security researcher and manufacturer, in that the issue was brought to the manufacturer's attention. Manufacturer didn't fight this. They did something about it. They fixed it, and because of the way that they've built their model, they were actually able to roll out the patch over their over-the-air updates and effectively seamlessly protect their customers from this potential vulnerability. That's where I think I see as you were saying, one of the big challenges with the Internet of Things idea is, if not enough attention is being paid to being able to update these things, then it doesn't matter if you have a continuous delivery model that produces improvements to the software and makes it more secure. If you can't get it out to the end user, then
yeah. Well, one of the big things about continuous delivery as well is it's not about continuous deployment. Just underline that, double underline that. What it's about is being ready to deploy at any one moment in time. So there is always one or two stable builds depending on how you organize yourself. So you can always roll back really quickly. You can always deploy the latest fully validated build, which may actually have the bug fix in that's just screwed up a whole bunch of smart meters or something out there. So continuous delivery puts you in a position where you can respond really, really quickly. You're not having to say, oh God, we need to roll something out really quickly. Let's accelerate the testing process, because the testing process is inbuilt in the whole thing. So if we can just put, sorry to be boring here, but if we can include security in that as well.
Wow. And the questions are coming in thick and fast. Yep. So it's another development deployment question that I'll ask now. How about security? This is from Joni, I think. So how about security in a highly regulated release environment? Possible or just not suitable for continuous delivery? So highly regulated environments.
Well,
highly regulated environments are where you absolutely should be using continuous delivery, because it's a much more robust delivery model. And so you can build compliance checks throughout your whole delivery lifecycle in an automated way. I mean, one of the things about continuous delivery quite often is if you've got the automation in place, you're gathering metrics, so you know what tests have been run. It's all very well documented. So basically, from a compliance perspective, it actually helps. It doesn't. So again, let me double underline this. Continuous delivery is about being ready to deploy something robust at any one moment in time, and continually pushing stuff through the whole process with all the checks and balances as you go. It's not about continually putting stuff out into the live.
It's not about chucking it over.
It's not about throwing over the fence, yeah. So that's continuous deployment, which is not what we're talking about.
Yeah.
John, I wanted to get on to the, that's all very nice. That's what people should do and can do, and so on and so forth. So what are people actually doing? And I know you've been doing some research in this area yourself.
Yeah, so again, just to
start with the positives.
Yeah, the sort of research that we've done by looking at, I think we've looked at 18 months worth of data from our platform to kind of build this picture. And we do this on a reasonably regular basis, so we're also able to see changes and trends. And one of the significant tipping points that we've reached is that now actually the majority of applications do get tested more than once.
Nice.
Well, that's kind of important, isn't it?
At least once.
When you bear in mind that I think the number is something like 6 out of 10 applications that we test fail on their first test, they fail a basic security standard. Typically we're using the OWASP top 10 as a benchmark, as a pass-fail there.
What's that? Sorry.
OWASP, the Open Web Application Security Project. It's an online community of people around application security, and they have this top 10, which is I think the last one was done in 2013. The top 10 vulnerabilities or flaw types, ranked not just by prevalence but by impact, and sort of quite sensibly arranged. So we do that testing, we do that analysis. It says that 6 out of 10 applications fail the first time they're tested. Well, if you're only testing it once, that kind of tells you you're not retesting it to prove that you fixed it, which pretty much suggests that you're not actually fixing those problems. So the fact that we are now seeing a majority of applications being tested more than once, that's good news. I think in actual fact the average was something like 7. The median was 2. Not quite so good, and at the top end we had, I think, something like 900 tests being performed on an application over the course of a calendar year. But let's be clear,
by more than once you mean at least twice?
Yes,
right.
Yes, okay. Exactly.
Can I ask you a question now? Because if you test an application, code scanning, whatever technique you use, you're going to highlight a whole load of potential vulnerabilities, some of which will be really quite serious and you never want those things to get out in the wild.
Yeah.
Others are kind of a bit, theoretically it's an exposure, but in reality it's so unlikely that you wouldn't necessarily want to prioritise that if you're short of time.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you see people managing? Surely it's legitimate, is my question, to not deal with certain...
Yeah, absolutely. So the way that we deal with it is by allowing the customer, the person that's responsible for scanning that, or someone in the hierarchy, is able to define what the bar is, what good looks like. In our case, we term it as a policy, which any security product in the last 20 years has got policies in. So our policies are about what does good look like for this application. And that allows you to prioritise, well, these particular things that we found, they're causing you to fail policy. They're the things that you need to fix. So you prioritise maybe based on, well, a blunt instrument would be severity of the flaw. A less blunt instrument would be to use categories of flaws based on your understanding of what the application does, what kind of data it's holding. That might help to inform those kind of decisions. Yeah. Or you can be extremely granular indeed and go down to individual CWEs, common weakness enumeration IDs. They're kind of looking at it from the position of what's wrong with the code rather than what does that wrongness allow you to do to the application. Right. So you define your bar of the standard that you need to reach, and then in a perfect world you retest until you are passing that bar and you fixed all of the things that are causing you to fail policy. So I'd like to think.
And that's the remediation rates, is it?
And that's to do with remediation, yeah.
And they're improving?
Definitely improving. We're seeing a definite improvement. There is an issue over here, and this is definitely not going to be viewable from the other people's site. In fact, it's barely viewable for me. But the slightly bad news there on remediation rates is that they're not very consistent. There's the good and the bad, and actually, I think the top quartile fix rate is dramatically higher. So you can see here for companies that are working with less than 20 applications, top quartile fix rate is around 56%. That's probably pretty good, when you factor in that notion that not every flaw really needs to be fixed.
So in plain English, 56% of that good group are fixing stuff.
Sorry, no, 56% of the flaws that are being found in that group
are being fixed. Okay.
And at the lower end of things, the median fix rate's 13%, the mean fix rate is 29%. So you can see that the numbers get worse quite quickly in terms of.
So while the good guys are doing more than half, on average, it's only about a third of problems are being fixed.
Exactly.
Okay.
And that is still a valid approach. There's that joke, isn't there, about the two guys that are running away from the lion, and one of them stops to put his trainers on, and the other guy says, well, that's crazy, you're not going to outrun the lion. And he says, well, I don't need to outrun the lion, I just need to outrun you. And so in a world where there is not enough attention being paid to application security, not enough issues are being fixed, then maybe that 13% is your trainers. It gets you ahead of the other guy, and it's the other guy that gets hacked.
So someone who looks at a lot of survey data, we have the concept of blissful ignorance. So I would suggest that it's probably worse than your numbers would tell us, because the guys who are probably less able, they're probably unaware of a lot of the vulnerabilities that do exist, because they're not geared up to actually find them in the first place. Yeah. If you're not testing, or you're not organised about testing, how do you know?
Yeah.
So it's a pretty worrying state of affairs, isn't it? When you get
the picture's not great, but it's good news if you do stop and put on your trainers.
Yeah. So you're not being completely downhearted about this situation?
No, I don't think so. I think there's a lot of room for improvement. For me, the room for improvement is mostly about this becoming a more broadly adopted concern approach that companies are taking making an attempt to deal with. I think once organisations start making an attempt, once they start trying to embed into their automated build process some kind of security testing, once they start considering it as part of the application lifecycle, I don't think I've got any numbers on it here, but one of the things that makes an enormous difference to remediation rate is putting some training in place, e-learning being available for the developers. I think the number is something like a 6 times improvement. So 6 times as many flaws being fixed in software in organisations where that's in place. So if people are doing things, we're definitely seeing progress.
But I'm going to push back slightly on the notion of, wouldn't of course you say that you just want to see application security become more important because you're an application security vendor. I mean, why do you want to see it become more important, apart from the fact that you're an application security vendor? If you like, what's the consequences that you're seeing out there?
So I mean, we all see hacks. Yahoo just recently, huge hack being, or the consequences of the huge hack being revealed. We see these kind of stories going out there. I suppose for me, actually, the more worrying thing is that my data, my personal information, is in the hands of a large number of companies, a large number of organisations. The phrase "incompetent buffoons" just popped into my head, but that was me, not him. So. And so I'll skip straight over that. But but you know, last year when we did this same kind of report last year, we focused on different industries. And you know, bear in mind that there's a slight bias towards the US in our customer base. So you know, this isn't necessarily quite as bad a picture for us in the UK, but I'm not sure it's going to be that different. What we found was that healthcare is one of the sectors that was performing particularly badly in terms of vulnerabilities being found when we first tested software, and in terms of remediation rate. I mean, the remediation rate was awful for healthcare.
So lots of vulnerabilities, not enough remediation.
Yeah, and a particularly common area of vulnerability was around cryptographic issues. Now, one of the cornerstones of protecting your data, my data, is encrypting it, and encrypting it well. When we see that sensitive information like healthcare information is being treated in that cavalier kind of a way, and I think it is cavalier, it's lax. When you're seeing that surely is cause for concern. Although, you know, yes, I work for an application security vendor, so you know, I absolutely do have a vested interest here. But I think it goes beyond that. I think the increased dependence on software that is across all of our lives and is being, you know, actively driven not just by business but by government as well. You know, it behoves all of us to do this stuff better.
And we do have an ugly slide, don't we? So
we do have an ugly slide, yeah.
I've no idea what it means. I just got told to put it in the deck, so you can.
So this was a kind of interesting one. Back in, I think it was 2015, at the beginning of 2015, there was an exploit kit that was released for a Java deserialization vulnerability, which, without going into the technical details, is to do with things being read from storage, being used in the program, and an exploit of this would allow you to potentially execute arbitrary code on the server that you're attacking, or the application that you're attacking. Later in the year, another exploit kit was released, and this time it was for a specific problem in the Apache Commons collection. I think it was version 3.2.1, something like that.
Yeah.
Exactly.
What's that?
That's kind of a little bit vague, but actually what's important there is that meant that you could exploit WebLogic Server, it meant you could exploit WebSphere, it meant you could exploit JBoss, Jenkins, I think there were a couple of other as well. Infrastructure servers that are used to power particularly large enterprise applications in that space. Now that meant that there was a widespread problem. Now, when we look at the prevalence of those vulnerable libraries, there was a fix produced. Apache came up with a fix. The prevalence of the vulnerable versions is around about 50%, whereas the prevalence of the non-vulnerable, either because the version came before the vulnerability was introduced, or the actual fixed versions here. Well, what does that add up to? Less than 7%, I think. The kind of message here is that as we're trying to move faster with software development, we're making use of more components, we're reusing code more widely, and that can in itself present quite a serious problem for organisations as well. So, the overall picture here is that it's important to test your own code, but it's also important to have a good sense of the code that you're importing through reuse of other people's components.
I almost wonder if there's a kind of plausible deniability. It's not it's Apache's problem, it's Amazon's problem, it's whoever platform I'm using's problem.
Well, that's interesting because you mentioned verticals in the financial services industry. There's been a big push over the last few years to actually include assessment from a security perspective of third-party components as part of your compliance process. So it's it is being taken quite seriously, and that is where regulated industries are probably a little ahead, maybe. But it does apply to everyone, and I think there's a life cycle of these threats as well, because everyone argues, well, my brand is not as visible as HillaryClinton.com, therefore I'm not necessarily going to get the Russian mafia going and sort of targeting me. But actually, once those techniques are developed on high-profile sites, any of the big brands that are targeted routinely, then those kits just start to become available in the on the dark web, as it were, and soon it becomes a commodity. And then, really, if you're not paying attention to it, you can easily get caught. The other thing to remember is most breaches are not reported. I mean, we know that, and that's pretty well documented. And you can hide this stuff, but when it does get to the point where it has actually led to something.
Okay, quick survey, hands up, who's been stupid? Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah. But it's bloody expensive and bloody disruptive, isn't it? If you if one of these breaches does materialise into something
Absolutely.
that hits the news.
Yeah, absolutely.
But the good news is we've got tools to sort this out. So moving to the final part of this, I'll wait. Hang on. So a little bit of honesty from the application security industry here, which is a pragmatic view, I think.
Yeah. No one thing is going to solve the problem for you. When we were preparing for this session, we had a conversation around manual penetration testing and where does that fit in. And it's part of the kit bag, as is automated analysis of the type that Veracode does. There's much that you need to do. I think from a scalability point of view, the automated approaches and making them part of more automation in the development and operations world is pretty important, but you still sometimes need the smart guy with a lot of skill to do the final validation. So no single technology is going to solve this.
Can I just say it's really refreshing to have a vendor come on one of these things and say, because normally we get to this point, as a lot of people know, we get to this point and go, yep, we've got an answer for that, and here it is. And yeah, sure, you like to think that you bring something to the party for sure, but you're not saying, yeah, we can sort it all out.
We can fix a lot. We can help a lot.
Of course. Yeah.
Marketing's outside,
but not by itself.
But not by itself. It's about more than that. And the second one here is that finding problems doesn't make you safer. It just makes you know more. Your comment about plausible deniability just now. I have spoken to customers, and there's been the comment that they don't actually want to test any more applications, because at the moment they're ignorant. If, however, they test and they find that they have vulnerabilities, unless they do something about it, they're negligent. And so they're concerned about turning ignorance into negligence and that plausible deniability. It's not a massively widespread viewpoint, but it is something that comes up.
There's human psychology in there. I best not look at my bank balance right now.
Yes, I'll just try the cash card. Hopefully, it'll still give me £10.
Exactly,
It feels like being a student again. So finding vulnerabilities does not reduce risk. It's actually the act of remediation. And there are things that can be done to improve that remediation rate. I mentioned e-learning or training of some kind, remediation coaching, those kind of things. But it's important not to focus just on finding the problems. You've got to do something about it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think it's finding, prioritising, triaging, whatever phrase you want to use. That's a pretty important part of the process, isn't it? So
seeing that as a starting point as opposed to an end point. So.
Yeah, so finding 100 vulnerabilities doesn't get you very far if you've got limited scope to actually go and fix them. If you can only fix 20 of them, which 20 do you fix? So that, I'll mention it again because I think that's a pretty important part of the process.
There has to be pragmatism, doesn't there?
You've got a lot of analysts, haven't you, security expertise sort of sitting there behind the scenes.
Yep.
So what do those guys do? Are they, I presume they're sort of monitoring, because yours is a cloud-based system, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
So they're looking at all this stuff that's going on, all the tests, the results, and are they sort of continually improving things? So saying, well, we've seen that now enough times that we can automate that as a test from this point onwards. And what do they actually do? I'm quite interested in.
Yeah, there's different parts to it really. There's yes, we're continually looking at the issues that are being found, making sure that our testing becomes as accurate as possible, so that we don't produce large numbers of false positives or false negatives, and we can produce results that are instantly valuable. The other side of that is then being able to provide a sort of on-demand consultancy for organisations, so that when they get a report that says you have some arcane problem with your application, you can get that guidance that helps you understand what to do about it.
Wood for trees job.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. I was going to jump onto our Jigsaw slide, if I may. The Jigsaw slide, which is here's all the things that need to be in place, or something. I don't know. So I think ultimately this is about so where are we out there in practice in terms of getting this right? So.
Yeah, I think we've touched on some of this already, but basically this is a bit of research we did about this time last year, I think. So it's a year old, but I don't think it will have changed a huge amount in the interim. So there we were talking to just over 1,000 people. This is a global study, who claimed they were doing DevOps. So this isn't just any old people. These are people who said, yep, we're doing DevOps and we're doing it properly. So then, as we do when we design these questionnaires, I'm giving stuff away to Reg readers here, we kind of sneakily come at the same question from a different angle. So, well, if you were doing DevOps, then what would you actually have in place in terms of capability? And that's how you end up with something like this. So you need to address all those things to be doing something that is pretty robust. The ones at the bottom are quite
I think I can flick on, can't
interesting.
I? So there we go.
Yeah, so just to expand those, are the one that's very relevant to this conversation is on the right-hand side. How many of them have built security and compliance measures into their continuous delivery DevOps process? So 35% say they've done. Remember, surveys are always optimistic, as you said, John. People don't like to admit when they've got holes. And work in progress, it might be a bit like me getting fit by the summer. It's probably still a work in progress.
Yeah, that's right. That beach body.
So, but the point is that it is, pretty overlooked, and a lot of people are not. They don't necessarily know what they should and shouldn't be doing, which is why the supplier thing is up there as well. Because sometimes, I'll mention Veracode because Veracode's here, but talking to your suppliers about some of these things, because they are working with lots of customers over and over again. They know what's important to have in place. They can help you prioritise when you've got limited budget, limited resource, and so on. And it saves you working things out from first principles, which you're almost certainly going to get wrong, even if you don't have time to go read all the articles and everything else out there. So there's really some foundation stuff which just needs doing. So I think the big takeaway for us was, we take with a pinch of salt when people say, "Yep, we've got this stuff done end to end." It's easy to say, but when you drill into some of the detail, there are some obvious things missing, like the security and compliance element, for instance. So you've got to pay attention to the detail.
Well, we've moved the what to do about it slide to right to the end. I think we've covered some great stuff throughout this, nearly up to about 55 minutes now, I think. We put it all in one. Everything, by the way, at the moment is three interlocking circles. My life is full of three interlocking circles. But really, it was down to what to do for dev and what to do for ops, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So Jon, maybe you could just pick out a few bits that really jump out to you.
Yeah, so I think we have actually touched on an awful lot of this. A lot of it comes down to, particularly on the development side of things, automation. The less direct impact we can have on the software developers' day-to-day life, the more effective we're going to be. So automation, speed, being part of the integrated into the tool chain, the IDE, the build system, those kind of things, extremely important. And then, to ensure that you're actually doing something about this, making some kind of remediation, coaching or education or whatever it might be available in the development community. That's what takes you from just finding problems to actually being able to fix them.
So that automation, essentially, as I understand it, people are putting together kind of tool chains anyway. So just get this one in as well. It's simple as that. So.
Yeah, you hear a lot in the sort of DevOps or the continuous delivery world of the notion of the pipeline. You just need this to be another part of that pipeline as things are flowing through it. So that kind of fits for the development side of things. For the operation side of things, well, we're starting to see some new technologies coming into the application security space, things that can do real-time detection and prevention beyond what the existing sort of perimeter-based approaches have. So that's going to be quite important, being able to actually do live protection of applications. Also, we shouldn't, this new world, this new wonderful continuous delivery DevOps world where everything's going well, there's been decades of software development before that. And again, I'm sure we've all worked at companies where there's that application that nobody touches because it's still useful and it's been there for 10 years. We need to find those applications too. Make sure that we find applications that have escaped into deployment and be able to go back and do something about the problems.
I did hear one of those, you wouldn't believe you actually heard it unless you heard it from the actual people kind of stories the other day, which was the two programmers that still knew anything about the software weren't allowed to go in the same taxi, just in case kind of situation for a live piece of software in a regulated environment, let's say.
Yes.
There's a serious point with some of that as well, in that applications that were originally designed to serve 20 people in a particular department. Now someone says, oh, wouldn't it be nice if we connected that web front end so we could flush that transaction through automatically? So some bright developer goes and develops a RESTful API wrapper around this application here, and it's never been exposed to the outside world. It's only ever been used by 20 people in that department before. Now it's pretty much through this API published on the web. So these things just sneak up on you. Just being aware of the bill of materials of an application. What is that application calling? Whether it's third-party libraries, whether it's APIs over the internet to third-party services, or whether it's some of your internal applications that haven't really been designed with web security in mind. Yeah. These are things that trip people.
I think some of that comes from the way that, and this is when I picked up a bit of development recently, just to try it out again. You just pull stuff out from the way I'll just use that version of PHP because it's running on my web server, and I'll just use that version of MySQL because that's the one I could download. Right, and it's like going around a sweet shop. You don't necessarily check the jar for the ingredients. You just say, I'll just use that API. Kind of stuff. So
building software today is actually almost more of a process of composition rather than, as in pulling together the various components.
And
rather than
you're not necessarily in control. Are you?
And having a human being try and follow their way through all of that stuff. Where does this go is almost impossible at scale, and particularly as things are continually changing. So you got to automation. We mentioned automation before. You've got to come back to it.
If we haven't, we should.
I think so. Yeah.
My big takeaway my big message about all of this is I think we built such a good foundation of automation, and I think we can take the right kind of tools from a secure application security perspective and piggyback on a lot of that work. We already have build scripts, we already have release automation systems, we already have lots of technology in that tool chain which is making things happen. You just want to insert the right calls to the right tools to make sure the application security piece is taken care of. So we're that far away, aren't we? We just need to do it.
I'm going to take that maybe as your final word on the subject, unless you've got anything else to add. But Jon, maybe here's a link, by the way, before I forget. So Veracode have got a very nice white paper, I understand, and we've condensed it into reg.cx/2nf capital F5. 2N capital F5, very snappy title for you. So we worked on that one for a long time to get that right. So Jon, just while people are noting that down for posterity, any last thoughts on what you want people to walk away from this with?
Well, I suppose my opening gambit was that I'd like people to take application security more seriously, and I hope that over the course of this session we've been able to kind of talk about some of the ways that can be done, and hopefully take a look at the white paper and get out there and get into the world of AppSec. Let's make the world safer.
Okay, well, thank you very much for your time, Jon. Thank you very much for your time, Dale. So message to all of our readers and listeners and watchers out there, thank you very much for reading, listening and watching, and crack on with application security, and thank you very much. Okay, cheers. See you next time.